Roar!
The Skyla Pseudonym by iisaw. Chapter 18 Vanishing Act. The main problem for us was that our modified spell guns didn't just throw pure energy, and so they had much less effective range than the Imperial weapons. We'd have to take a beating in order to get close enough to attack. The Nebulas had rigged a few small hatch covers as temporary shields to protect the gun crews, and I'd slathered them with the anti-magic goop. But it was nowhere near the careful preparation I would have liked for such an assault. Nebula wasn't designed to carry so many ponies up top, let alone protect them properly. The first shot hit Nebula over her second gas cell and crackled into a light sparkle of somatic discharge. The Imperials had fired too early, and the blast had been more than half dissipated by the time it had reached us, so it didn't even scorch the anti-magic coating on her envelope. I love it when my opponents make dumb mistakes. Of course, cleverness isn't all that necessary when one has easy access to overwhelming force, and the Imperials were accustomed to getting a bigger hammer as a response to most problems. Nebula surged up hard beneath our hoofs. The complete ballast dump was part of the plan. We needed to go up from out of range to in your face as quickly as possible to reduce the time we spent getting shot. The next blast hit the top tail fin with a roar, and the surface blackened and bubbled, but didn't catch fire. The next one hit just aft of the topmast, and some of the ponies stationed at the hatch there got hit with the spatter that sprayed under the edge of the improvised shield. There was a couple of yells of surprise and pain, but nothing to indicate any pony had gotten seriously hurt. Right after that, two shots hit us simultaneously somewhere forward of the mast. They were hard enough that Nebula shook and swerved, and we all had to grab hold of something to keep on our hoofs. Then the whistle plug in the copula tube blew 3 hard blasts. It was a signal for us to prepare the attack. We all crouched down and held our breath as a big vent panel slid open and the roar of escaping lift gas surrounded us. The gas wouldn't do any pony any direct harm to breathe, but it did displace oxygen, and being lightheaded while trying to aim high-energy weaponry was inadvisable to say the least. The vents slammed shut, and there came a single long blast from the whistle. We flipped the hatch covers aside, and the weapon crews swung their launchers, catapults, and guns toward their targets. Sirocco had done his job perfectly and brought us to a near stop between the two ships, with the top of Nebula's envelope just slightly above the enemy's gondolas. That gave us a direct line of fire to their turrets and engine pods. Of course, that meant that their guns had a direct line of fire at us, but I was counting on their confusion when faced with a situation they couldn't possibly have trained for to make them a lot slower than our own crew, who knew exactly what to expect. I love it when I'm right.
First rank, fire!
I shouted. The net launchers flung their loads at the propellers, fouling them with chain-laced nets, while the catapults targeted their turrets with cross-headed shafts to smash the heavy metal barrels of their guns. Even though our green crew missed more than half their shots, we still completely disabled the engines and turrets to either side of us by the second volley, and the few shots the Imperials got off missed or only did structural damage. I looked forward towards the copula and saw the haze of smoke that Owl's crew had fired their grappling lines into the enemy's envelopes. It was time to... I was slammed onto my side by a blast of magic from my right. I hadn't seen the Imperials open ports in their gondola so that they could use their light guns. It was a stupid and hopeless tactic, and that's why I wasn't prepared for it. 1. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I started to slide down the curve of the envelope, instinctively flopping and scrabbling to get my grip on the smooth surface. My head and neck felt like they were on fire, and I couldn't think clearly. It didn't even occur to me to use my wings. It was only by pure chance that I hooked the back corner of my four-hoof shoe onto a strand of the anti-magic webbing and jerked to a stop. I shook my head in an effort to clear it. The plan. There was something I had to do. Something important. But what? A moment later, Ao was there, supporting me and saying something. I couldn't make it out. She must have realized my confusion, because her antlers glowed softly and the image of a green flame appeared in front of my muzzle. Fire? Yes, fire! I remembered.
Fire those ships!
I bellowed, using the royal voice to make sure the enemy crews heard me clearly.
Burn them from the sky!
My words sounded strange and muffled to me, and I worried for a second that I'd messed up the voice technique somehow and that no pony had heard me. But then I saw our specially fitted guns firing. I had lost my goggles somehow and squinted in the glare. The sides of the enemy airships erupted into roaring green infernos. Within seconds, huge burning patches of the outer envelope tore away and twisted in the fierce updrafts caused by the magical fire. Well, the Imperials weren't so foolish as to continue fighting in the face of the imminent destruction of their crafts, and they began throwing themselves out of every conceivable opening. Parachute canopies popped open like spring flowers under a fast aging spell. Ao lifted me back up to the main mast hatch. I lied and told her I was fine, though I may have mumbled my words a bit because I really couldn't hear my own voice. She gave me a worried look, but flew back to the copula after a moment. While I blinked and squinted, trying to get my vision to clear, my catapult crews fired a few more grapples into the enemy ships, and then attached the lines to winches so that they could pull them in close for boarding when the time came. And the time came right on schedule. Just as the last Earth ponies bailed off of their craft, the illusion spell ran out of energy and the devastating green fire and apparent damage flickered and utterly vanished. Gotcha! I thought with smug self-satisfaction. Then I passed out. When I woke up, I was ravenous. I turned my head and saw Ao and Skyla having a whispered conversation by the door to my cabin. Ao saw me move and floated over to the bunk.
Miss Nightshade, can you hear this one?
I had enough sense not to nod.
Yes, pretty well, Miss Ao. Is there any chance of getting some food?
Ao glanced at Skyla, who nodded and said something to a pony standing outside my cabin. I sat up slowly and my head only swam a little.
You did it?
Skyla nodded as she approached my bunk.
Yes, the prize crews, too, are aboard the airships and the nebulas are transferring over the gems and crates of medals as we speak.
2. In aeronautical tradition, a captured ship is referred to as a prize, and the ponies put aboard her to take over are called a prize crew.
So, for the moment, she continued, I'm in command of 3 ships. I guess that makes me an admiral, doesn't it? Only a commodore, I think.
I corrected her, taking a bit of guilty pleasure in her slight pout of disappointment.
No pony seriously hurt? Aside from you?
Skyla said, lifting an eyebrow at me.
A couple of nasty burns and 1 broken foreleg, but nothing else, fortunately. So,
she glanced at Ao.
What?
I asked, dreading an unpleasant surprise.
Loose leaf is back aboard,
she began.
No, just lie there and let me tell you about it. It'll go quicker if you don't interrupt me.
I frowned, but nodded at her to go on.
The second ship had a big contingent of Pegasi too. They didn't make it out to attack you and Swift because Loose Leaf had gotten a group of her own ponies aboard, and they set up an ambush right by the hatch where the attackers would have to exit.
She paused, avoiding my gaze, and then went on.
It was a pretty terrible fight, and Loose Leaf's bunch weren't interested in taking any prisoners. She actually...
Skyla squeezed her eyes shut and shook her head. She looked like she might vomit. I looked to Ow in puzzlement. The Karen bent down and whispered to me.
This one informed your ardent followers that you would not be pleased by a gift of the severed heads of your enemies.
I groaned and dropped my head back on the pillow. It hardly hurt at all.
I'll try and get it through their sick.
A little voice at the back of my mind warned me.
Don't bring skulls into it. I'll give them a dose of the old school Luna style. That should straighten them out.
I finished lamely. The awkward atmosphere in the cabin was broken by Cream Puff arriving with a steaming bowl of soup and a fresh chunk of buttered bread.
Oh, thank you, Puff!
I said enthusiastically, as glad for the interruption as for the meal.
My pleasure, Miss Nightshade,
he said as I began wolfing down the food.
Oh, hey, you've got your ear back.
Huh?
I managed to avoid a barely soup spit take by the barest of margins.
Your ear,
he said, helpfully pointing to one of his own. Ow turned, and I couldn't see the expression on her face, but it seemed to convince Cream Puff that he ought to immediately be elsewhere.
I'll come back for a try,
he called out over his shoulder as he cantered away.
Where's this over?
I demanded around a mouthful of excellent sourdough. Ow sighed.
This one did not wish to distress you unnecessarily. And...
It was hard to glare sternly at her with a muzzle practically submerged in the soup, but I managed. Ow glanced at Skyla. Skyla shook her head slightly and rolled her eyes.
The shot that hit your head burnt away your right ear and a good deal of your skin,
Ow said bluntly. I stopped chewing and lifted a hoof to my right ear. It felt sore, but whole.
Really?
It grew back, she clarified.
Really?
Yes, the sight was quite... She said interesting and Skyla said gross at the same time.
Huh.
I didn't know I could do that, but it made sense. Even occasional kitchen accidents would leave an immortal pony looking like the victim of a mad slasher after several centuries, if some sort of regeneration wasn't involved. I'd lost scars before, but I hadn't realized I could regrow entire parts. Fortunately, I didn't make a habit of losing them in the first place, and had no desire to experiment to determine the extent of the power. Also, the head of the crossbow bolt that hit you in the side was squeezed out of...
Ugh!
Skyla's cry of disgust interrupted Ow, and she pinned her ears back as she turned away.
I'm going on deck for some fresh air.
And she had gone, Ow allowed herself the slightest of smiles.
This one suspects your niece has not the proper appreciation for some of your Majesty's more unusual qualities. Oh, I think she just would have preferred a glowing aura sort of regeneration involving less in the way of parts coming and going,
I said, licking the last of the soup out of the bowl.
Honestly, what did it look like?
It was disturbing, she said without hesitation.
For a short time, we did not realize what was happening and feared some curse or malady.
I shrugged.
Reality rarely meets romantic expectations.
Ow lifted a quizzical eyebrow.
Romance in the sense of a fictional narrative,
I explained.
As you say, Majesty.
It was what Ow said when she didn't quite understand whatever it was I was babbling on about, but was content to remain unilluminated.
Is there any more soup?
I asked. We anchored in a forest clearing somewhere north of Emberdale. Loose Leaf's group had made sure we weren't followed from the battle, but there would no doubt be all available Pegasi combining the province for us, and every pony was working as quickly as they could. The 3 airships were camouflaged with netting and cut branches, which would probably be adequate if our pursuers didn't come very close. I felt worlds better after my meal, so I took a tour of the Imperial ships. They weren't built for comfort, but they were well designed given the restrictions they had to operate under. Most importantly, they were simple enough for the prize crews to operate safely under normal conditions. The crews weren't going to be fighting any battles. While I was unconscious, they'd stripped out everything non-essential to flight from the captured ships, and that included the guns. So lightened, the airships would be marginally faster than other craft of their class, and capable of a greater altitude ceiling. The unicorns also had the advantage of being able to recharge their engines on the fly, which made running away a very viable tactic. Their mission was to spread out and deliver the medallions to as many unicorns in the Empire as possible. They would drop teams at strategic spots where they could continue on hoof, and near metalworking centers where more of the medallions might be made. If my calculations were correct,
10,000 medals at 6 ponies each, with an outside failure rate of 2%. So I'm betting it'll be closer to 0.2, means 57,600 from the first batch alone, I said to Skyla as we watched the last crate of medallions being lowered over Nebula's side from the quarterdeck. That's just over 23% of the unicorn population in a little under a month. It'll be harder and harder to produce medallions as time passes, of course, but with sympathetic Pegasi and Earth ponies, yes, there are quite a few by all reports. In 6 months, the Empire won't be able to maintain its infrastructure, let alone any war-making capability. But there will still be unicorns left, won't there?
Skyla asked.
Yes,
I agreed.
Even some by choice, I imagine. I don't like that,
she muttered. I gestured towards the other 2 airships.
Unicorn crews will be able to keep airships like those in the air when the Imperials can't. That's a big advantage. The rest of the plan will fall right into place because simple economics. All it will take is for one smart, pretty noble to realize. But are you sure the medallions will work? Everything hinges on that. Of course I
trailed off. I wasn't sure. I had planned on testing a medallion after we'd captured the Imperial ships, but the little matter of being shot in the head had upset my schedule. Skyla lifted an eyebrow at me.
I haven't tried one out yet, but I'm sure they'll work just fine,
I told her. She turned away to look at the lowering sun.
The ships lift at midnight. It would be nice to know all this effort hasn't been a waste. You're right,
I nodded.
I'll go ask for volunteers for the test. And isn't there something else we needed to do before we head west?
I paused, one hoof in the air. I couldn't think of anything else on the schedule.
Remind me. The Overseer,
Skyla said, coldly.
Emberdale is only a league south of us. It shouldn't take long.
Oh, I said.
That.
Every pony who knew about the plan agreed. Every pony thought it was not only necessary, but just. Every pony said that, in the absence of the ability to imprison or banish, it was the only rational way to protect his underlings. Every pony but me. I would have gladly killed him in the heat of the moment and rationalized it after the fact, I suppose. But the heat was long gone, and the thought of a cold-blooded execution, no matter how well-deserved, made me queasy. In books, it always goes like this. The hero challenges the villain to a duel. The hero defeats the villain without really harming him much. Then the hero is satisfied and turns her back, allowing the villain an opening for a foul strike from behind. This morally justifies the hero when she turns and delivers a finishing blow. Sometimes, in darker, more modern novels, there's an anti-hero who dispenses justice when the law fails. There's almost always a speech, articulated justification for ridding the world of the undoubtedly evil villain, delivered by the anti-hero to the villain before the final act. Often this gives the villain a chance to suddenly produce his hidden weapon, further justifying his righteous end. But the world wasn't going to arrange itself into black and white moral pigeonholes for my benefit. There was going to be no duel, no speech. The overseer was going to fall that night and never wake up again. Unless...
I have an idea,
I said to Skyla. The overseer woke up surrounded by his female servants. He jerked and writhed for a minute before realizing he had been effectively bound. I remained in the shadows of the unlit bedroom, where he couldn't see me clearly. The unicorn mares silently watched as he cursed, demanded and blustered. I had left him ungagged in the faint hope that he might say something of interest, but it swiftly became clear that all he was going to do was run through the usual litany of a bully backed into a corner. I floated a power crystal over to the bed and wedged it firmly between his hind legs.
I'm sending you to a place where you will receive justice for what you've done. Wiser ponies than I will decide your fate,
I told him.
Who knows? They might even pardon you if you are willing to change your ways.
You can't do this to me! I am...
These mares are going with you to testify as to what you've done to them,
I continued, ignoring his outburst.
There's a small chance that the gem will malfunction and explode instead of transporting you all to Equestria, and in that case, I think the meat of your size will protect the others. It would be a lucky escape for you, I think.
You have no right to...
No, it's true, I don't. By the laws of the Empire, you could legally do nearly anything short of killing your servants. Because of that, I'm going to give you a choice. You can go with these mares, or you can stay here.
I stepped out of the shadows.
With me.
He decided to go. I gave Katydid a map, a letter of introduction, and a royal warrant, along with private letters to Luna, Cadence, Celestia, and Spike.
You should arrive somewhere north of Canterlot if my calculations are correct. Just ask any pony you see for assistance, even Earth ponies. They'll be happy to help.
She hugged me, which was a bit of a surprise.
I'll keep the others from killing him, she said. Tartarus is worse, I promise you,
I said. I looked down at the medallion in my magic field, turning it so that the fine lines of the mandala glinted in the dim light. Sun, moon, and star sigils clustered at the middle, making a key to a very specific lock. I set it gently on top of the gem.
Time to go.
Katydid nodded and then said to the others,
Gather around the bed. Get as close as you can.
The 5 of them crowded in, and Katydid raised her hoof over the medallion. I smiled at her and nodded in encouragement as I backed away, out of range.
Go ahead, pull the ripcord.
She brought her hoof down hard, forcing the center of the mandala down onto the point of the gem, and the unicorn's horns pulsed as a burst of sudden magic flowed over them. The portal spell blossomed around them. It hissed and churned, burning its way through the sickened interstitial medium by pure force. In a few seconds, the connection was made and the 6 ponies vanished. I let out a sigh of relief. It was nice to know that my plan was still feasible. Celestia might be a bit miffed at me when the flood of refugees began appearing in Equestria, but if everything worked out as I hoped, in the long terms, many of them would return to their homes as full and free citizens. I was feeling decidedly chipper on the flight back to our little fleet's hiding spot.
Everything is going to be just fine,
I thought, with a relaxed smile on my big dumb face.